Hello and welcome into this week's edition of the ARCA Menards Series Rewind Show. I'm Garth Allen, this is Racing News Now, and today we're talking about race number 2 of the 2022 ARCA Menards Series East season, the Pensacola 200 from the Five Flags Speedway. And this is another race where it wasn't a barn burner. It wasn't the best race I've ever seen, but it was pretty good. Let's be honest. I mean, yes, there was 15 cars in this race. Yes, that's not a big number. I know we would like more cars in the races. Believe me, I want to see more cars in these races too, just as much as you do. But as I've said many times, it's not about how many total cars are in the field. It's the number of competitive cars that are in the field. And to be honest with you, I wasn't sure we had enough competitive cars either. Because it seems like what we're going to come down to most races this season, not surprisingly, is Sammy Smith and Taylor Gray. Those two, head and shoulders, for the most part, are the two fastest cars in this East field. No question about it, week in and week out. That being said, we did have some other players in this race. Leland Honeyman, in the 02 for Young's Motorsports, started from the pole, led the first 27 laps. He was fast all night. He really impressed me in this race, and I'm very curious to see if he can keep up that speed going forward this season. To be completely honest, I wasn't expecting much out of Leland Honeyman this season. He's in a Young's Motorsports car. Have we ever seen much out of Young's Motorsports in trucks or in ARCA? Outside of the couple of Talladega wins that they've got in the trucks, have we ever seen much out of them? No, we really haven't. So the fact that he can come out here and be competitive in that Young's car and run up there with Sammy Smith and Taylor Gray is very impressive. Jake Finch also impressed me immensely in this race, making his ARCA Menards Series East debut. Jake Finch in that Phoenix Racing car did a really good job. I was very impressed by what I saw out of Jake Finch, and I hope we see more out of him going forward, because I think Jake Finch might be the real deal. I know we've only seen it in one race, but he's got a lot of experience at the late model level, has had a lot of success at that level. I think Jake Finch might be the real deal. So hopefully we get to see more out of him going forward. And to be honest, from what I saw last night, I think Leland Honeyman is the real deal as well. So I think we've got some names in this East Series this year that we're not expecting that could really come out here and surprise us. And there's a few more in this Pensacola race that might have the potential to be that real deal as well. Lots of cautions in this race, 9 caution flags for a total of 39 laps. Lots of those were single car spins. Of course, we had the 2 scheduled race breaks. The only real incident that was more than about a single car spin, and it still was a single car incident, was the 22 of Steve Austin spinning off of turn 4 and nosing it into the inside wall on the front stretch. Outside of that, it was just lazy single car spins here and there to bring out the caution, bunch the field back up, and made for some good racing. The more we got the field closed back up, the more we really got some good racing for the lead, and that was the most exciting thing to me all night, was that we actually got some good racing for the lead pretty much all night. Now, as we look at our lap leaders for the night, 3 cars spent time out front. We already mentioned Leland Honeyman, his 27 laps were the first 27 laps of the race that he led from the pole. So clearly that brings it down to Sammy Smith and Taylor Gray. Sammy Smith led the most laps at 107. Taylor Gray also spent a good chunk of time out in the lead as well with 66 laps led. Before we get into the results, I'm going to tell you right now, Sammy Smith is now 2 for 2 in the ARCA Menards Series East. Sammy Smith won this race. Now, I tell you that without leading up to any suspense like I usually do, to talk about Taylor Gray's penalty at the end of the race. Now, usually, I'm one that is quick to jump and say things to and about the ARCA Menards series when things like this happen, when there's penalties that are given that there's not a whole lot of explanation for, that don't seem to make a lot of sense. We've seen this how many times now over the past couple of years. That being said, I did reach out to ARCA PR Director Charlie Krall to get an explanation on this Taylor Gray penalty. Because essentially what happened here, on the final caution, that lap 184 caution when Ashton Higgins spun in turn 4, Taylor Gray received a penalty and was moved to the back of the lead lap. He was running second at the time to Sammy Smith. There was no real clear explanation of what the penalty was for at the time, so I made sure to reach out and figure out what exactly this penalty was for. Taylor Gray apparently jumped the restart on the previous restart. The way ARCA determines if a car has jumped a restart, there's two red lines on the inside of on the inside wall on pit wall, at least at Pensacola. I assume there's something similar at every other track that's not a NASCAR track. I haven't looked at each track to figure this out, but I assume there's at least something similar, if not the exact same thing at every other track. They've got two red lines on the inside wall coming off of turn 4. This is essentially the restart zone. This is how they determine if the leader fires off first. You don't have to let the leader be the first car to the line. You can beat the leader to the line, the start-finish line, but the leader has to be the first car to pass the double red lines, the restart zone, if you will. Sammy Smith was not the first car to pass the double red line. Sammy Smith was the leader at the time. Taylor Gray had about that much out front of Sammy Smith's nose. And here we even have the video that ARCA used to determine this. And as you can clearly see, you see the double red line. It's not the clearest video in the world, but you can see the double red lines come into view on the right side of frame at the very end of the video. That is where Sammy Smith has to have a nose out front. He does not. Taylor Gray has his nose in front of Sammy Smith. Usually, this would be a pass-through penalty under green, but since there was a caution 2 laps later, they went ahead and they just put him to the back of the line. So in fact, the caution actually helped Taylor Gray, because as we'll see when we get into the results now, Sammy Smith is your winner. Taylor Gray restarted in the 6th position on the final restart. Worked his way back to 3rd behind Sammy Smith and Leland Honeyman, who got a career best finish in 2nd. If Taylor Gray had had a pass-through penalty under green, he would not have finished 3rd. And as you can clearly see from the video, by the rules, Taylor did deserve that penalty. So if you're a Taylor Gray fan, unfortunately, 3rd was the best he was going to do. Because again, if he'd gotten a pass-through under green, he wouldn't have gotten back to 3rd. He'd have been laps down and definitely would not have gotten 3rd. And now he at least is still in contention for the championship. And I say in contention for the championship, I know we're 2 races into the season, but it's a 7-race season. We've only got 5 races left, so we've really got to start thinking about the championship already, which is really weird to think about. Rest of your top 5 in this race. Daniel Escato in the 60 for Josh Williams Motorsports came home with a strong 4th place finish in his series debut. Willie Mullins, first short track top 5 for Big Willie. Want to give a shout out to him. Great run for Big Willie in that 11 car. A car prepared by Mullins Motorsports, but entered as a fast track car with that number 11 is my understanding of how that works. Now, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong on that. Really good run for Willie Mullins and Mullins Motorsports. Really nice to see them picking up a great run on a short track. Rest of your top 10 in this race. Brandon Varney in the 44 for Jeff McClure came home in the 6th position. Ashton Higgins in his debut in the East Series came home in 7th. Jake Finch, not the result that he really deserved on the night. Ran at worst 4th all night and unfortunately had a flat tire with about 8 laps to go in the race. And with it being as close to the end of the race as it was, they didn't even attempt to replace the tire. He'd have maybe gotten back out with 2 laps left and it really wouldn't have changed anything. So came down pit road with a flat tire, parked it, and scored in the 8th position at the end of the race. Donald Teague came home in 9th, and Christian Rose rounded out the top 10. Final page 11 through 15, Steve Austin, Steph Moyer, Tim Monroe, Brad Smith, and Nate Moeller. So that's your results from the Pensacola 200. Given that Sammy Smith is now 2 for 2, I don't want to bore you with so many Sammy Smith interviews, so I will see what we can do about interviews with someone else this week. Maybe a Leland Honeyman interview, maybe a Jake Finch interview. We'll see what we can do. But now let's take a quick look at your points. As I mentioned, we're only 2 races into the season, but that only leaves 5 races left. So it's not like we got a whole lot left this season. So we really got to start looking at these points and seeing what we've got left here. Sammy Smith is, of course, your points leader after winning the first 2 races of the season, holds a 12-point lead over Taylor Gray. Leland Honeyman currently sits in third, 13 points back. Big Willie Mullins, shout out to Big Willie, 4th in points after 2 races. Great spot in the standings for Willie Mullins, 22 points off the lead. And Donald Teague in the Visconti 74 car sits 5th, 23 points back. And you see the rest of your top 10 there. Steph Moyer, Christian Rowe, Steve Austin, Brad Smith, and Max Gutierrez. Interesting to note here before we move off of the points, only 9 cars competed in the first 2 races. You see Max Gutierrez there in 10th. He is the first car that did not show up to Pensacola. Everybody in the top 9 has at least 2 starts to their credit in this series. Everybody below 9th, everybody below Brad Smith only has 1 start so far this season. So take that how you will, that there's been 9 cars to start both races so far in the East season. But I believe that'll do it for us on this Rewind show. Irwindale coming up this weekend, race number 2 for the West Series this season. See if Jake Drew can finally pick up that first win of his career in the West Series. Austin Herzog, everybody else out there competing for that one. The West is always such a fun race, no matter where they're at. I'm excited for it. I hope you are too. Flow Racing on Saturday night. But I think that's going to do it. So as always, we want to thank our Patreon supporter, Regional Manager William Holmes. Thank you as always for your support. It is greatly appreciated. If you'd like to be a patron of RNN, the link is down below in the description. Patreon.com/RacingNewsNow. Not required by any means, but definitely appreciated when you want to support RNN in that way. But like I said, that's going to do it for us on this one. So we will see you on Saturday for Irwindale coverage for the West Series. At that, I'm Garth Allen for Racing News Now. Doc has a bell on his collar now. I didn't think this through. I know, I didn't, did I?